Well, there you go, man. How about that? Shawshank Redemption, one of the greatest movies ever made. Pretty good, huh?
Yeah, well, look, it was great. It was still no Green Lantern starring Ryan Reynolds.
Oh, you gotta get over that movie, Wade. It's terrible.
It's a piece of cinema genius. It even won an Oscar.
What? No, it didn't.
Look!
And the Oscar goes to...
The Green Lantern, starring Ryan Reynolds. See?
You've clearly dubbed your own voice over that.
Oh, I never.
I'm looking... The Goofy movie rates higher on IMDb than the Green Lantern does.
Oh, please, they're just corrupted by big film.
Oh, all right. These Rotten Tomatoes gives it an audience score of 45%.
Dude, we always talk about the organic industry.
Oh, mate, facts will just not convince you.
That is true. Let me explain.
All right, let's get to it.
How hard this was to research and try and sound genuinely like I was doing work. I don't know why
Howdy, Burn.
What's going on, Wade?
Not a lot, man. Just doing the usual skepticism, science kind of thing. You know how it is. It's always that way.
Just rolling with it,
Rolling with the punches.
So what have you got for us today? A bit of bias?
Yeah. Oh, I'm pretty fucking amazing at this skepticism thing, so I thought...
I'm definitely not biased, so I'll tell you why you are.
Yeah, I'm definitely not fucking biased, but you and everyone else around me don't know what they're talking about. No, I thought... Well, we've done a lot of research, as we know, and we kind of research new topics every episode, or we have guests on who tell us new things, and you know, we deal with a lot of people within the skeptical community, science, you know, communicators, and I got thinking, well, wouldn't, like, in some kind of, you know, upside down world, kind of like on Stranger Things, where what happens if, like, we're all wrong and the anti-scientists, you know, are right and all that type of stuff? And I thought to myself, well, I wonder what kind of, you know, personal bias I have, and how do I identify my own personal biases, and that I'm not, like, in an echo chamber? And
dude, we're totally in an echo chamber.
Well, that's the thing. We are, absolutely. We speak to scientists and skeptics from, you know, the skeptical community. So sometimes we can kind of be a little bit, oh, really? People think that? Like, why would someone think that? Why wouldn't you, you know, vaccinate your kid? Or why would you think
Except
the Earth
the world is
round?
round.
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes very strange to us. And then I was thinking, well, we're in an echo chamber. And then the process kind of got going. I'm like, well, how do you convince someone? Because if there are still people out there who think these type of things, then maybe we're not doing our job properly. Especially, well, we know we don't do our job properly.
Yeah. It's the other science communicators that are supposed to be doing their job.
Yeah, I know. Like, you know, like they've really got to pick up their slack, you know, because we ain't contributing.
We're more science comedians than communicators.
I wouldn't even say we're funny. So I got thinking, you know, what are some things that, you know, useful tools that, you know, our listeners and just people in general can do, not only one, to get information and to interpret it. What are the effects of getting information from different areas? You know, what's leading to the anti-science movement, and also how to convince someone that you're right. How to convince someone to align themselves with evidence-based kind of reasoning.
Right, because there's a lot of research out there that just suggests facts don't work. Telling people what is factual doesn't actually convince them that it's real.
Yeah.
It blows my mind.
It is, but there's also, you know, also what happened before that to get to them. So what are the influences that are, you know, what are some of the subconscious influences that are causing them to get to that conclusion? So I thought first I'd look at, so how do we interpret information? Now, we as a species, right, we always want a sense of belonging. We want to belong to a community. Most of us want to belong to a community. We want to have a group of friends, want to have a nice group of friends, and we want to be part of a family. And if we don't have those things, often it can cause, you know, mental health issues, and because we don't get that satisfaction, that longing to belong. You know, we don't get that sense of belonging, I should say. So
I've never really had that. No one likes me.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. But you know, and hence, you know, you've got those issues. This means that we have a tendency to, like, associate with people who are like us. Okay? So we have this tendency to associate with people who are like us. So, for instance, we like other science communicators. We like, scientists, science educators, a whole range of things. And, people who are into football. For instance, we go to football all the time together.
Yep.
Now, although this is beneficial, evolutionary speaking, to our survival, that we hang out with people who want us around them, it can also create an echo chamber. And now, this is what sociologists call a homophily.
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 Homophily? I don't know. Where's this word?
It is homophily.
Homophily, all right.
Or homophily.
Homophily.
I'm going to say homophily.
Homophily does sound more
Homophily.
educated.
Yeah. So, once again, not pulling our way to science communicators. So, some of the things we tend to find attractive when building relationships with people are things like ethnicity, age, gender, education, occupation, and geography, among other things. So, where people are from, what race you are, what things that you're interested in, all that type of stuff. How well educated you are. Is hence why a lot of people don't want to deal with us. Now, one of the habits that all people are guilty of are searching for information that agree with them. So if you're a part of a community, it's kind of like, if you're religious, you might be a creationist. Therefore, you and the majority of people you hang around are creationists.
This is confirmation bias, essentially.
This is pretty much confirmation bias, yes. And so one of the problems that we have that we always kind of... generally people do, is trying to find information if they get in an argument with that agrees with them. So, for instance, if you're arguing that the Earth is flat, well, the first thing you would generally look up is evidence that the Earth is flat. Now, that means that you've kind of gone around the main scientific consensus and come to a conclusion that you had already thought. So you're just kind of validating your conclusion.
I've personally done that, looked up how the Earth is flat, or evidence that the Earth is flat, and I've got to say, it's fucking terrible.
Yes, but once again, that's the right way to be, is to look up the counter arguments, but generally, because there's so much noise out there, it's really hard to find the appropriate evidence. And so what happens is, when we are associated with a group of people or a way of thinking, then it's very easy for us to dismiss new evidence that kind of contradicts our preconceived notions. I find it really fascinating, and I've done things as well. When discussing online or discussing with people who have different views with us, evidence for this.
Yeah,
and I understand why people would search that because, well, it saves you a lot of time.
Yeah,
you just get exactly what you're looking for.
Here's what I'm looking for. This is my point.
Exactly. How do I prove this point? But the right thing to actually search. Let's say you wanted to look at, say, having a debate with a climate denialist.
I don't really do that all that often.
Oh, God. You're terrible at that.
I can't help it.
You're just like, I'm like, burn, let it go.
It's like that scab on your elbow that I just can't stop picking.
Yeah, I know. It's really sore now, man. It is. And once again, and I'm going to go into it a little bit later in the show, it's not worth going, here's evidence to say you're wrong, because studies have shown, even since the 70s, that is not the right approach to take. So technically,
probably should
you've been wasting...
Get fucked as well, huh?
And telling them to suck your balls is probably not the best way to communicate a message. But here's the thing. This isn't just something... And one of the big misconceptions I had, right, is, this person thinks this, so they must be scientifically literate. They're science trained, so they must think this. Going to those assumptions, it's not some studies have shown that that's not the way that people think. We may actually think a little bit differently. So even scientists have trouble with what I said before about falling into echo chambers and then kind of dismissing new evidence. So even if we have an education and training in science, it doesn't make us immune to our own bias.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so for example, a study published in Nature by Khan, ETAL, found that public division isn't kind of those with science degrees versus those without. It actually had more to do with how we form our beliefs.
Oh, really?
Okay, yeah.
So it's not to do with your education, it's to do with your own personal development.
Sometimes, yes, sometimes it can be that. And that's why you can have scientists come out and say things about vaccines and things about climate change and things about the Earth being flat, whatever.
Evolution, whatever you
Evolution,
want it to
a range of different kind of main issues that we deal with as science communicators, pollution and energy and all that type of stuff. It's because they're not kind of looking at the science, they're more kind of looking at how they form their beliefs. And that's the issue. It's how do they form their beliefs? Now, the factors which kind of showed the two kind of things that they looked at was a conflict between the personal interests of the individual. So how this will affect you type thing. Okay, so there's two main areas kind of that the person looks at is how will it affect me, and this versus the collective belief that kind of we all share in making use of the best available science to promote common welfare. So, and what I mean by that is scientists even struggle with, okay, how does this affect me personally? Does this affect me personally? Will my research get or will something that my colleagues in, say, the mining industry or whatever, climate scientists, how do they view this? And will I have to change my person? How does this affect me?
I have to be careful in how I word this because my social circles will judge me on this, and I don't want to be ostracized from them.
And then that's kind of...
See, this is why it's a really bad idea to have friends, I think.
Yeah. And that's why you've got none. And on top of that, then they've got to battle this against, well, what is the science saying and what is the best for our scientific understanding? So even scientists battle with these things at different times too.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, interesting.
It is very interesting. I feel like people like Ken Ham probably form their opinions by sniffing turpentine and headbutting a Bible, though.
Well, Ken Ham is a perfect example. He was educated at Queensland University. Or University of Queensland.
I forget.
UQ, so University of Queensland.
Yeah.
And he has a training in science. So he's a science background. So surely there's the perfect example of there's someone who knows the process, who can research things and come to conclusions about certain things, has a complete different view to what the scientific consensus says because he aligned it with his own personal beliefs. Or, not beliefs, but even personal gain. That ark costs a lot of money to build.
Yeah, I assume so.
Yeah, so...
Where did Noah get the money?
Where do you get the trees?
That's a good point
I suppose
as well.
you have to chop it down. I don't know.
I
I'm sure there's something that could be misinterpreted.
That's probably the smallest question of that whole story, though, isn't it?
I wonder what sort of wood he used. Yeah. So then it got me thinking, well, what's doing this? So what is giving us this misinformation?
Is it vaccines?
Is it vaccines? You know what? That's one thing I didn't look at. Give me 5. Now, a study published in the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford, it actually found that in the case of climate science, and obviously there's a lot of misinformation as we know about climate science, the contributing factors for the prevalence of climate denialism. Now, they use skepticism in this, but I found the study a little bit confusing because they were kind of assigning skepticism to people who are healthy skeptics, so looking at kind of the scientific evidence, and those who are skeptics as in, I don't think it's happening at all. And I found that a little bit. So I've actually changed the wording in this episode to actually say denialism to help kind of give a clear
distinction
between the two, to be able to distinguish between the two groups. So it said... where are we? Okay, yeah. Might have to cut that one out. You're not going to cut it out now because I said it. No, damn it!
Any opportunity I have to make you look stupid, mate, I'm seizing with both hands.
Well, there are plenty of opportunities. So the prevalence of climate denialism were actually to do with the existence of organised interest that fed denialist coverage, okay? And also politicians espousing some sort of variation to climate denialism, and as well, the receptiveness of partisan media groups. So media groups with a political or some sort of other vested interest. All right? Now, the paper concluded that this was the reason why in the US and the UK there were greater skeptical, denialist voices in the print media And what they actually found is, so in the US and UK, there's a greater amount of climate denialism than in other countries. Now, one of the things they believe is because of it's been now taken on a political issue in those kind of that
so
kind of
countries
realm.
outside the US and UK don't see climate change as politicized?
They don't see it as politicized, no. And here's an example. So the study found that in the US and UK, they attributed to 86% of the times that politicians were quoted about climate change. Now, out of the whole type of spectrum, okay, so 86% of the times when, so what it did, this study is it looked at all the kind of, media kind of, all the information the media presented in these countries, or they obviously through reasonable kind of picking, right wing media, left wing media, all that type of stuff. So
get a bit
took
of
a kind of
spread.
spectrum, yeah. And they found that 86%, of the times that politicians were quoted about climate change were in the US or the UK.
Oh, okay, so every time a politician was quoted, they were an American or a British politician.
In this study, it was 86% of the time that would be from the US or UK.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. Now, here's the interesting thing. Of the information researched, 1/3 of the print was from politicians and only 1/5 were from climate scientists. So politicians were having a louder voice on climate change than the actual scientists
who are researching it.
Exactly.
That's
and
ridiculous.
it is absolutely stupid, isn't it?
That is madness.
Yeah. But once again, because it's taken on that kind of, you've had politicians speaking about, it's taken on a political thing. And as you know, political views can be quite subjective. They're not objective.
What do you mean, can be?
Well,
are exclusively subjective.
Yeah. Well, if you kind of say, within reason. Well, you could prefer a political party because of this, because the economy did blah 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 or whatever, or they got this down by
whatever
this percent.
reason. But so much of politics comes down to your own opinion.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Why are we listening to politicians on something like the science of climate change?
Well,
or more
exactly.
than
But
scientists.
you can see though in these countries that the Anglo kind of Saxon countries that this is having a very prominent effect on public opinion because it's becoming politicized. So
Murdoch. Excuse me.
Murdoch. Did you see that fox? Yeah. So how do we change these kind of beliefs? Because these people have associated themselves with an idea and a group, or kind of how they envisage themselves in society, their role or their place or what group they are with. And this is taking, this can take a larger part in determining, how they behave or what they vote for or what they think is a priority than actual scientific evidence.
That's terrifying.
It is very terrifying. But at the same time, though, we're doing it right now. We associate ourselves with the skeptical community, the scientific community. So therefore, when we look at something, we go, hang on, what would a good skeptic do? Oh, a good skeptic would do this.
Yeah.
Okay? So we do exactly the same thing. But listen to why we're right. No. So what we've known for a while, okay? So there was a study called Bias Assimilation and Attitude Polarization, the effect of prior theories on subsequently considered evidence. Now, that was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in 1979. And I got a couple of quotes from the study. So it found that, quote, exposing contending factions in a social dispute to an identical body of relevant empirical evidence may be not a narrowing of disagreement, but rather an increase of polarization. So what that means is by arguing a point, you might actually become more polarized. So that person you're pushing them further away. When you're trying to bring them closer, you're actually pushing them further away. I found this really interesting because you think about how politics has gone. Politics is kind of criticize.
Yep.
And what we've seen now is we're seeing this polarization of political opinion, especially in the US. We've seen, studies have shown that the Republican Party are moving more to the right.
Yeah.
Which is rather interesting. Now, the way they did this was, So what they found was, so this is how they set it up. Subjects supporting and opposing capital punishment were exposed to two purported studies, one seemingly confirming and one seemingly disconfirming their existing beliefs about the deterrent efficacy of the death penalty. As predicted, both proponents and opponents of capital punishment rated those results and procedures that confirm their own beliefs to be more convincing and probative ones, and they reported corresponding shifts in their beliefs as the various results and procedures were presented.
Wow, so as long as they read something they agree with, they're like, well, this is clearly the more convincing argument.
Absolutely.
So they'd already really been convinced.
They'd already made their mind up. And
when they read the other one, they were like, this is clearly bunk.
And if you have a look on TV at talk show panels, how often, and when someone comes out, like we have a show called, was it Q&A in Australia? And then that's where, I'm not sure if our listeners have seen it, that's where Brian Cox ripped into Senator Malcolm. Oh, he's not senator anymore. He got the boot. Malcolm Roberts. And it made the news. But the problem is, people walking in there have already kind of said, oh, I'm of this political leaning or I'm of that political leaning. So they've already assigned themselves to a political leaning, which means that they are more likely to kind of say, well, I agree with this because this is what everyone else agrees with. So how do you kind of combat that? How do you combat when you put evidence to someone that they will...
If you can't use evidence and facts, how do you convince someone?
Exactly, and this is one of the things, and as we're seeing kind of people become more and more polarized through time, this is one of the challenges that we, as what we consider the rational part of society, however, once again, if you were to ask someone who's very conservative, they'll tell you that they're rational and you're irrational. So, once again, we are self-titling our position. Okay, so we are in essence
else.
being kind of confirming our own biases. Now, so there was research done by a Brendan Nyan, and it showed that many anti-vaxxers are willing to drop mistaken beliefs about vaccines, but as they do so, they also harden in their intentions not to get their kid vaccinated. This shows that the scientific beliefs of people who oppose vaccinations are only part of the issue. Facts alone, even if believed, aren't enough to change people's views. So that was taken from a Conversation article that he wrote. Now, the actual Tom Stafford who wrote the article. Now, Nyland's study found... or suggests that correcting myths about vaccines may not be an effective approach to promoting immunization. So how do we deal with this, okay? Now, Stafford, who is a psychologist at the University of Sheffield, goes on to say, so to avoid reinforcing a myth, you need to provide a plausible alternative. The obvious one here is to replace the negative message. So, for instance, MMR vaccines doesn't cause autism. So that kind of statement, it's like, well, you are wrong.
Yeah.
All right. So if you change it with a positive one, say, for instance, he uses the example, the MMR vaccine protects your child from dangerous diseases. So kind of taking a more kind of positive spin of children dying of dangerous diseases. So anyway, so there are a number of reasons why anti-vaxxers may not kind of gamble on the slight chance that vaccines cause harm. Because remember, it's much easier for people to accept that they've stuffed up due to inaction than acting upon something and then having a negative cause and negative effect. Because
you'd rather feel like you haven't done something rather than you've caused harm.
Exactly. You've actually interfered in this situation rather than letting natural things happen.
Yeah.
Even if, and they found this, even if the outcomes were the same, parents would be happier inacting than acting and causing the same kind of harm. So, for instance, not vaccinating your kid and having them get autism, okay, is better than vaccinating your kid and then them getting autism. Or getting, say, polio. Your child getting polio from your inaction, okay, people find, I'm not saying everyone, but people do find more comfortable, studies suggest that most people find more comfortable that than if they were to get their child vaccinated and then have, say, a vaccine injury reaction or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
It's much like going out, have you heard the old saying, it's much easier to ask for forgiveness than permission?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I live by that
statement. So, here we go. So, how do we kind of solve this kind of problem? So, what Stafford says He says the problem lies with like the kind of scientific evidence. Not with the scientific evidence, but more of like a distrust of science. So rather than going, here's the evidence. No, you're wrong. Look, it says it right here. You are wrong. All right, it doesn't. I don't think any papers say that you are wrong. Maybe there's one out there.
There's probably a couple.
It's pretty. It's
probably a psychology
pretty
paper.
Narrow audience, isn't it? Yeah, very descriptive. Very personalised message. But it actually says the best way of dealing with that is actually educating them on the scientific method. So for instance, if you would approach someone and say, look, okay, so you think that the MMR vaccine causes autism. And what he thinks the best way of doing, what the literature suggests, is actually saying, well, okay, I personally don't think it does. And here's why, because the scientific method
looked at this group of people that had it, this group of people that haven't.
Exactly. And this is how I have formed my conclusion, and this is how I've come to a different conclusion than you.
Yeah.
Actually presenting it that way is probably a better way of looking at promoting science and communicating science. So I have learned so much from doing this research, just personally about communicating science, and also as well speaking to people about science who don't agree with me, because we get in an echo chamber as kind of science communicators.
Except for a few people on our Facebook page.
Oh, well, yeah, exactly. But the best way of doing it, although it's kind of cheered upon when, you see like, a climate denialist get it, or an anti-vaxxer or a flat earther just get completely burned, But
your evidence suggests they don't even know they've been burned. So how that really detracts from the satisfaction, doesn't it?
But as a community, we go, hurrah, But once again, it's not the best way. Evidence suggests it's not the best way of communicating. The best way of communicating the idea is going, okay, you come to that conclusion. I've come to this conclusion. Now, here's why, and here's how the scientific method works, and here's how science works to form conclusions. And this is why I've based my opinion on that. And this is why I've come to this conclusion. As opposed to saying, you're wrong, you idiot, you suck.
You suck.
Suck my balls.
So we got to teach people about how to do science more than what the science actually says.
And as well, teaching people about how the scientific method works.
Yeah, okay.
How science works, how science operates. Because once again,
because it's a pretty fucking good system. It's not perfect, but it's pretty decent.
Well, okay, let's say, for instance, I don't know, renewable energy. If you're talking about renewable energy and you believe in renewable energy, then you are more likely to be associated with the left side of politics. So once again, you may just come to that conclusion because of the fact that you've aligned yourself with a certain demographic of people. Demographic of people.
Yeah, okay.
We need to teach that person how science works and how science operates in order for them to get to that conclusion. We don't want to gain that conclusion because they've aligned themselves with a political view. We want to get to them to get to that conclusion because
science does not work that way.
Exactly.
You make your conclusion after you've made the data. Exactly. You don't make a conclusion and find the data.
Exactly.
That's religion.
That is religion. Yes, that is religion. But the Bible does say this. Yeah. And I find it so interesting how people are like, oh, but they've changed their view on what that passage says. And you're like, oh, come on. Now you're just having us on.
Yes. There was a guy that came on and said, well, clearly if you're interpreting it this way, you're not interpreting the Bible correctly. I'm like, isn't that the problem with a lot of religious texts, is they can be interpreted so many different ways?
Absolutely.
And you're not allowed to argue with them because, all the authors are dead.
Hey, hey, leave them alone. Yeah, leave Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But even that, though, okay, let's take the religious aspect aside. Even looking at a paper, reading one line, cherry-picking data from a paper to prove your point. It's like, no, you haven't read the whole thing. You need to interpret it as it says. So, yeah. There we go, Bern. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I'm going to adopt some of these when I start talking to people. I think I'm going to word it a bit differently when I'm talking to the climate contrarians, which is my favourite group of people to have discussions with. Although I have been finding GIFs recently are quite effective. I've been dropping GIFs in as my responses. They seem to go all right.
But once again, so you've changed a lot of people's minds, have you? Yeah. So that's the best way for our listeners of dealing with someone who has a different view, has come to a different conclusion based on their evidence or based on what other people believe.
You need to take them on a journey with you.
Take them on the magical journey of science. And you too can come on a magical journey of science with us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. We have our podcast, obviously. Obviously, if you're listening to it, we're all on iTunes as well. You can help us out on Patreon. So patreon.com/Sci-gasm podcast. Please, it's really, really hard to run a podcast successfully if we don't have your help.
Especially when you're poor like we are.
But
seriously, all of our Patreon followers, we really appreciate all your help.
We love you guys so much.
And you get a lot of this stuff.
And they get special and early access to extra content, kind of us troweling the internet trail of weirdness. And also, as well, they get early access to episodes.
There's a few mature videos out on the Patreon
that
viewers.
Sounds so bad.
Don't worry, we both keep our pants on. But stuff we were less inclined to release to public forums.
Thanks very much for listening, guys.